Bill, you've kind of waded into the treacherous territory of geoengineering to mitigate climate risk. What's your take on it? I know that you've personally funded some research in that area. How are you thinking about that?
I think it's important to distinguish being for research on something, to look into it and understand its pluses and minuses, versus being for something. Nobody knows enough about any of the geoengineering approaches to be for them, and yet some of these are things like putting sulfates high up in the sky to simulate what happens when you have large volcanoes. The question is, should there be scientific work to look at these different approaches, including free air carbon capture? And yeah, I provided a modest amount of money so people can look into these things. It is one of the policy options that people will talk about. And if the world doesn't reduce CO2 emissions, it would be one of the few things you would do to avoid ecosystem disasters. And so, it's kind of like saying, is heart surgery preferable to a good diet? Absolutely not. Let's go for a good diet. Understanding whether heart surgery works or not, and the risks involved, so you can tell people, no, that's not an option, or that, perhaps it is. It's going to take decades of work. It's been kind of a banned area where governments were not putting money into it. I think that will change. I think it will become part of the dialogue and get a hard look, because it absolutely needs to be understood.
Any thoughts?
Well, certainly I would agree that we don't know a lot of the consequences. We actually have been geoengineering for a long time. Agriculture is huge engineering of a certain type, mild forms of geoengineering. The idea of having roofs reflecting white is a very mild form of geoengineering. It reflects the sunlight back into space, which we don't think there will be severe consequences of that. It lowers your air conditioning bill, things of that nature. Plants. One of the things we're looking at, thinking about, reforestation is a reversal of another form of geoengineering that we think is a mild form, and it's good. And how do you actually get plants to bring out some of the carbon dioxide? And if we can use that, sequester that begins to reverse what we've been doing.
We're basically out of time, but I want to ask you both one last question, which goes to the Solyndra controversy. I think there's widespread agreement in this room and in both parties and probably around the country that investments in R&D, the kind of work that ARPA-E is doing, is something that the government should support. But the department has also tried to get companies through the valley of the death, if you will, through financing mechanisms. Has Solyndra sort of become an impediment to thinking about the government financing as a source for helping companies get through to that commercialization stage? Or are you still committed to that?
Well, I certainly, no one can deny that the reaction to Solyndra has a dampening effect on government finance programs in companies. But you also have to realize that when this loan program was set up and passed by Congress, they knew they wanted the Department of Energy to invest in innovative companies. That was a mandate. And they knew that not all of those would work. And so they set up a loan loss reserve fund. It's about roughly $10 billion appropriated. Appropriated means you could have spent it on hiring policemen and teachers. You could have spent it on research. You could have spent it on water projects. They appropriated this money expecting that there will be losses. Now, it's extremely unfortunate what happened with Solyndra, $500 million loss. But I would be personally very surprised that we're going to lose a third of that appropriated money. And so again, but the reaction was unfortunate. We should not lose sight of the fact, and go back to this, that America is the most innovative country in the world. We can lead in these new technologies that the world will want. And bear that in mind. And so, in a certain sense, it's ours to lose. Let's not blow it. There's a huge market out there.
Bill, any advice on this topic?
Well, the Department of Energy, with the Stimulus Act, was asked to very quickly get involved in some things that there had been modest activity before. And asking the department to move so quickly to do things, including creating ARPA-E, was a very tough challenge. And I think the department's done very well. You know, ARPA-E got off, did a lot of good grants, has been able to make the case that they should be funded at higher levels. These loan guarantee programs, they brought in expertise. It's easy to look at any individual one and say, you know, how do you think about that? But overall, we need to be willing to take risk, and there are going to be sort of anti-Solyndra stories. That is, things that paid off very, very dramatically. So you know, I'm very supportive that we put more into this energy space. I'd like to see it double. So clearly, I'm a fan of risk-taking.
Well, join me in thanking these two great leaders for a great conversation. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Thanks for coming.
Have fun.